The Honourable Member for Canberra.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak on the Appropriation Bill, which of course is about the government's priorities. And one area that has been failed to be prioritised by this government are some of the most vulnerable people in our society and their carers. And I want to talk today about aged care, the NDIS and carers. I want to start by sharing a story of Angelina Giorgio and her sister-in-law Tanya Giorgio from Canberra. Tanya came to meet with me in 2009 to talk about Angie's situation, where she is living in a dementia ward in aged care here in Canberra. Angie has catatonic schizophrenia as a result of a stroke, and was in this dementia ward in spite of being only 59 years old and not having dementia. She was mostly bound to her bed and was lucky to be taken out for a walk in her wheelchair once a week. And when I talked to Tanya about this, she said that she was basically told, you need to accept that this is life for Angie now and she will die here like this. She had been approved for supported disability accommodation package, and part of the reason Tanya met with me was she was concerned that at her upcoming assessment she would not get sufficient funding for this to become a reality. And Tanya was a fearless and tireless advocate for her sister-in-law. And in writing to me and in us putting in touch with some other great advocates in the ACT, including Atticus, her situation was able to be improved. And in February, I was able to go and meet with Angie in her new home here in Canberra with our Shadow Minister for Disability, Bill Shorten, the Assistant Shadow, Kimberly Kitching, and our Shadow for Carers, Emma McBride. And it was just a really heartwarming and fabulous thing to see Angie in her new home, and her condition has improved so much since being there. She has been feeding herself a bit, brushing her own teeth. We chatted with her about things. She has even been doing a little bit of cooking herself. She has her own little garden that she can go out into, and she just seems so much happier. And this is exactly what the NDIS is supposed to be about. Innovative solutions. She's living in a townhouse, and with support from CHC Canberra, they were able to have this innovative solution where she has round-the-clock care and support in her own home. She doesn't need to be in aged care. She doesn't need to be in a group home. And this is exactly what the innovative solutions that were supposed to come out of the NDIS, but it took so much fighting to get there, and it should not be this way. Everyone should be able to get these things, and they shouldn't have to wait so long. If not for a carer like Tanya, who had just advocated and never given up for her sister at great, personal cost to herself, this wouldn't have happened. And I just want to put that story on the record because it says so much, not only about the NDIS, but about aged care, and I want to talk more about that. The NDIS under this government is not being implemented properly. It is not delivering the choice and control that was promised. And the latest is the proposal of independent assessments, and this is raising incredible concern in the disability community because it fundamentally destroys that choice and control that people are supposed to have under the NDIS. I spoke about this in the Federation Chamber earlier this week, and in sharing my speech, many people with disability and their carers from Canberra have got in touch with me, and I want to read some of their comments to give a sense of the distress that is out there about this. Julie said, I have never been made to feel like a beggar. I have never been so made to feel like a beggar for funding and assistance as I have since the NDIS. I am a carer for my 26-year-old daughter and am sick of hearing how generous NDIS is for giving me funds. You guys changed the funding model and now we have to jump through hoops to get what we rightly deserve. The worst bit is my daughter's daily life is dictated by people that have never met her and have no idea of her need. It's job to the people that make decisions, but to us, it's our life. Jasmine said, I have been so psychologically damaged by the whole NDIS process, I can't even deal with them without having severe panic attacks. The supports I receive are life-saving, but the hoop jumping and never-ending stress that the actual NDIA itself puts participants through is cruel and cold-hearted. This government that's in power is a disgusting blight on politics and a stain on Australia. Jessica said, "On behalf of my baby son, who is an NDIS participant, thank you. I was so hopeful for his future to be born into a time of the NDIS. He is thriving with regular therapies. I am now very worried that independent assessments will result in a reduction in his funding and that he won't have the opportunity to reach his full potential, that a reduction in therapy will impact his ability to become a thriving independent adult who is able to provide meaningful contributions to society and to participate in paid employment to feel fulfilled with his life." Helen messaged me and said, "As a mother of 2 young men with complex disabilities, one of whom has significant impairment caused by autism, I can see how these changes have the ability to take away the decent life we have worked so hard to create for our boys. I'm crying as I type this. Please do all you can to help others understand what is at stake if these changes are allowed to occur without significant modification." And there were many more comments, and this is just indicative of the fear that is being placed on people with disabilities trying to deal with the NDIS at the moment. And this is not how it should be. I'm on the NDIS committee, and I hear from people all around the country about these issues. And unfortunately, what we are seeing is that the approach is around cost cutting. The approach is this disgraceful attitude that somehow people with disability don't know what's best for them and are trying to get something that they are somehow not entitled to. They are after the supports they need to live their lives. Bottom line, we need to be listening to them, and these independent assessments should be scrapped. I want to move on now to aged care. And of course, we have seen the Aged Care Royal Commission handed down recently with its final report of 148 recommendations to fix aged care. Aged care affects us all. It is our parents, our grandparents, our partners, our friends. Any of us could one day end up in aged care. And the problem is, as was so many people would have seen on Q&A where Hamish MacDonald was reduced to tears about the fact that people are in fear of going into aged care. We should not be in fear of going into aged care. It should be something that is a place where people go with dignity and the care that they need in their older age. Instead, under this government, we have seen $1.7 billion worth of cuts. In response to the Aged Care Royal Commission report, we did see $500 million announced, and we welcome that, but we need a serious response to this in the budget. This absolutely needs to be addressed. We have 100,000 people on waiting lists for home care at the moment, and we have seen 28,000 people die while waiting on these lists. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. This government has been in for 8 years. It's time to get this right. We really need to get it right. I really also want to take this opportunity to thank the people who have brought forward their stories and those of their loved ones to the Aged Care Royal Commission. I want to share a story as well from a constituent of mine about her parents, who has written to the Prime Minister and included me in her letter, because her parents, her father passed away in 2019 and her mother last year. They were in an aged care facility in Brisbane, and her father had a wound that was mismanaged and allowed to become necrotic, and this contributed to his death. This is horrific for people to see their family members, their loved ones in these situations. Her mother passed away last year, but the final months of her life she suffered abuse and lived in fear. Now, my constituent has made a complaint to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner, but she doesn't feel that it's been dealt with in time for changes to be made in that facility for the benefit of other residents. And so she's written to the Prime Minister and CC'd me, and I just want to read some of that. She says, "I have reached my wit's end in dealing with the non-responsiveness, obfuscation, disinterest and lack of accountability of the aged care industry and the ineffectiveness of your own Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. I am therefore humbly writing to ask you add your power to my voice and restore justice, meaning and purpose to the lives of my late parents. In their lives and deaths, justice and meaning and purpose was denied them by the facility. Despite my representations to them and to the ACQS, this continues to be the case. And then she's written to me saying, in the preceding context, I request that the recommendations of the Royal Commission into Aged Care be fully considered and legislated by Parliament. My parents' legacy is that future aged care residents are protected by robust federal legislation with severe penalties for clinical failures, false written records and bullying behaviour within nursing homes. This just needs to happen. These are our loved ones, our parents, our grandparents. We need to get this right. And what I want to say about that as well is that while the findings of the Royal Commission are horrific, nothing short of horrific, shocking, completely unacceptable, for those of us who've had a personal experience with aged care, unfortunately they are not surprising. We know that these things are common. And I want to talk a little bit about my grandmother, Joan Handsaker's own experience in aged care here in Canberra. My grandmother was a wonderful woman, a wonderful wife, mother and grandmother. She was a nurse, a formidable tennis opponent and a talented artist. And she was an inspiration and remains an inspiration to me. At the end of her life, she lived with dementia, and she lived with us for some time, but eventually had to go into aged care. And I'm not going to go into the details, but suffice to say that many of the most horrific things that have come to light I saw happen to my own grandmother. And I know what that's like. And for my mother, this is one of the most painful things that she lives with. I do want to share a bit of a story because it points to some of the policy responses. And I want to talk about staff ratios, the need for registered nurses, and the need for better treatment of our aged care workers. My grandmother was in a dementia ward with 8 other women, and we were told that the ratio at the time was 1 staff member. Now, that must have been a policy of the home that she was in, because people would be surprised to know that there actually are no ratios for aged care staff. We have ratios for childcare, for classrooms, for hospitals, not for our older Australians. So there was 1 person there with the 8 people, and sometimes of the day that might have been okay, but at other times, there were at a meal time, that is not enough to care for those people. And my mother would go in there at least once a day, usually twice, to help with the care of my grandmother. And I remember sitting there at meal times, and the meals would come out, and many of the people could not feed themselves, and there was no one to help them, and the meals would be taken away. And then someone would say, I need to go to the toilet, but someone else would be taken, so they would have to say, you have to wait. And then people needed to be put to bed, and my mother would end up helping the staff there to put the other residents to bed because there simply was no one there to care with them. And the new staff would come in, and these were the most passionate, dedicated, wonderful people that wanted to spend time talking with the older people and making their lives brighter. But as soon as they had been there a little while, it became clear they could not do their jobs in the way that they wanted to because there simply were not enough staff. There simply were not, and either they would leave or they would just do their best, but that was the crux of the issue. Not enough staff, not the proper training, not registered nurses around to deal with the issues of wound management, of abuse that was going on. That absolutely needs to change. And before the Royal Commission report came out, Labor had announced an 8-point plan, and in that we included staff ratios, 24-hour registered nurses, and these are recommendations of the report. It is absolutely time that as a nation, as a parliament, we prioritise aged care. We need to prioritise people with disability, we need to prioritise older people and their carers. People like Tanya, people like my mother, this is the most selfless task of our carers, and they are also neglected by this government. The informal care is valued at $78 billion a year, but they only receive a fraction of that. And they give of themselves, and we should support them.